Welcome to the Young Turks. I'm your host, Jake Huger. And we have got an exciting and important hour ahead for you guys. Yes, this hour is important. I'm going to start with Tim Geithner. Tim Geithner is under attack. They're coming at him from the right. They're coming at him from the left. Now, Pete DeFazio had some very strong words for him. He's a Democrat. He went on Ed Schultz's program. We're going to do that second. First, we want to go to the Republican attack. It's by ranking House Republican on the Joint Economic Committee. His name is Kevin Brady. He's from Texas. Now, unfortunately, he's going to come at him from a little bit of the wrong direction because he's going to try to put the whole economic mess on Geithner's lap, as Geithner tries to explain in this clip, because this is a direct confrontation. Geithner was in front of the committee, that they inherited a lot of that mess. They're going to have that fight back and forth, but Brady keeps going to, hey, the liberals don't like you, the conservatives don't like you, what are you doing wrong? And that's a fair question. So let's watch the whole, confrontation here, and it gets heated, and then we'll come back and talk about who's right and who's wrong.
It's been a year since the president was elected. It's appropriate for the American people to assess how well this administration's economic policies are working. They are not. They have failed. Unemployment skyrocketed far past White House projections and promises. America continues to shed jobs, more than 2.8 million since the stimulus was enacted. We've had a series of embarrassing investigations about all the wild stimulus claims, the latest fake jobs from fake congressional districts, and today General Accounting Office will reveal yet more scandals within the stimulus claims, in the case of which thousands of recipients claimed jobs and they have not yet received money. The U.S. has the worst performance in terms of unemployment rate among the major developed economies since the stimulus bill was enacted. Worse than Australia, worse than Canada, worse than the European Union, Japan, South Korea, not to mention China. The industries that the White House and Secretary you promised would have the most job creation, manufacturing, construction, have seen by percentage the greatest job losses. The deficit is becoming frightening and threatens our economic recovery. The budget challenges we face with Medicare and Social Security, Fannie and Freddie Mac have been left unaddressed. We are reduced to begging China to buy our debt and getting lectures from other nations on our financial disarray while they discuss replacing the dollar with a more stable reserve currency. Much of the TARP money is still hidden from taxpayers' eyes, while in the public's view, Wall Street is still getting their bonuses, and major businesses and small businesses are delaying their key investment decisions as Washington moves on uncertain issues, health care reform, cap and trade, burdensome new regulations, and a host of new tax increases. Mr. Secretary, you are the point man on the economy. The buck, in effect, stops with you. For several months, conservatives on Capitol Hill have called for you to step down. Last night, Congressman Peter DeFazio said that there is a, quote, growing liberal consensus that Secretary Geithner should be removed. Quote, we need a new economic team. Conservatives agree that as point person, you failed. Liberals are growing in that consensus as well. Poll after poll shows the public has lost confidence in this president's ability to handle the economy for the sake of our jobs. Will you step down from your post?
Congressman, it is a great privilege for me to serve this president, and I am very pleased to have a chance to address the range of concerns you said. I agree with almost nothing in what you said, and I think almost nothing in what you said represents a fair and accurate perception of where this economy is today. Now, I think it's important to start. Welcome the advice that you're providing after you gave this president an economy falling off the cliff, values of American savings cut almost in half, millions of Americans out of work. Again, the worst financial crisis we've seen in a generation.
Remind me, Mr. Secretary, what post were you holding when President Bush left office? Just remind me what economic post you were holding.
I was the president of the Federal Reserve Bank in New York. Great honor and privilege for me to serve at that time.
Does the Federal Reserve Bank have any oversight over the economy or any input into its performance?
The Federal Reserve established by Congress, is responsible for trying to make sure that we keep inflation low and stable over time.
And are you shirking responsibility for the design of the bailout or its role?
No, absolutely.
In the economy?
The actions that the Congress made possible, too late, but made possible last fall, were absolutely necessary to breaking the back of this financial panic. And without those actions, and the actions the President put in place with the Congress, support of many people in the Congress beginning this year, you would have an economy still falling, not growing. You would have had job loss still accelerating, not slowing. You would have had the value of America's savings still falling, not rising. You would have had confidence.
That's been changed.
No, but
that's created several quadrillion new jobs. Is that right,
Congressman? Again, it's just a basic fact. A year ago, this economy was falling at the rate of 6% a year. We were losing between 500,000 and 750,000 jobs a month, and that process was accelerating, not slowing, until the President of the United States came and took office.
Mr. Secretary, the public has lost all confidence in your ability to do the job. And it's reflecting on your president.
Congressman,
conservatives agree, liberal Democrats agree that it really is time for a fresh start, and I would urge you to consider that.
Congressman, if you, again, Chairwoman Miller, may I just respond to this? Congressman, if you look at any measure of consumer and investor confidence today, if you look at any measure of the strength and stability and health of the American economy, if you look at any measure of confidence in the financial system, it is substantially stronger today than when the President of the United States took office. And that happened not on its own. It happened because of a set of tough, difficult choices. And this economy did not come into this simply facing the worst financial crisis in generations. It came into this with almost a decade, certainly 8 years of basic neglect of basic public goods in health care, in education, in public infrastructure, in how we use energy. And fixing those problems is a central obligation of this Congress and this administration.
All of that to the millions of Americans who no longer have jobs because of your decision.
They would have had more jobs, there would have been more confidence, more employment in this country if we had not let this crisis get to the point that it did. And we would have had a stronger fiscal position if we had had 8 years of paying for our commitments, not borrowing against them.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Hinchy's the
you have to take responsibility for your decision.
I take responsibility.
All right. So, man, that was heated. There's no question. I mean, yesterday on the program, I asked why don't the senators and the congressmen go after these guys that are testifying a little harder? Well, asked and answered. Okay. Well, in this case, Kevin Brady delivered. Okay. Now, having said that, it's the first time that I felt bad for Tim Geithner. Okay. Because the attack was half fair, half unfair. In fact, the heart of the attack was unfair, saying, oh, look at all these bad numbers, isn't it your fault? And as Geithner was saying, hey, listen, wait, we turned these numbers around. You gave us a time bomb where all the numbers, the unemployment was growing at an unbelievable rate, and the economy was cratering at an unbelievable rate, and we've turned those around, and we are not at where we want to be. And to be fair, Kevin Brady's right, they did not meet their unemployment projections that the White House did, but they turned the numbers around and unemployment continues to grow, but at a much slower rate. So it's some mixed results in the first year, and you know I'm no fan of Geithner, but I think that Brady is being unfair by pretending that all of this happened in the last year when the time bomb went off and they've been trying to stop the bleeding in the Obama White House. Now, having said that, now here are some fair points that Brady made. Your projections were off, and you got to be accountable for that. Number two, you don't have the right emphasis on jobs. Look, jobs keep going, and that's the number one issue. We keep losing more and more jobs. And what did you do? And honestly, Geithner put as a priority shoring up the banks, which he then thought, well, that'll trickle down to jobs. But it hasn't. And that is one of the main complaints that progressives have against Tim Geithner. And if conservatives have that complaint, and they do, they should. Now, they have, I think, in my opinion, the wrong remedy for that. Of course, as usual, they're going to say cut taxes. Okay. But at least they're right about the performance. So it's a mixed bag here. And he was right to say, hey, wait a minute now. I see one part of this economy that's recovered, and that's Wall Street bonuses. Very true. And then he said, look, you're trying to avoid responsibility here, but what was your position while the time bomb was going off? Because he kept talking about the last 8 years. The last 8 years, Geithner did in his defense. He's right about that, but Brady's right to point out that he was the president of the New York Fed, and he was asleep at the wheel when the time bomb went off. It was his job to regulate. And he asked him about what was your role in the bailout. And Geithner, along with Hank Paulson, even during the Bush administration, was one of the principal authors of the bailout. So, you know, Geithner's in some trouble there because a conservative at least has, or a Republican in this case, has about half of his points that are correct, which is a stunning success rate for Republicans this day and age. But now, here he gets trouble from the left. Pete DeFazio on Ed Schultz's program, Ed Schultz sets it up by first explaining how much Goldman Sachs is getting in bonuses and how they've started this fund to help small businesses. Are they not merciful? But it's actually 3% of the bonuses that they're going to take home. And he brings in Congressman Pete DeFazio, and we pick it up there.
You know, from the almost a very...
What kind of progress can be made to make sure that TARP money goes where it's really going to stimulate the economy, small business, and infrastructure?
Well, that's our money. It was borrowed in the name of the American people. It was borrowed to bail out Wall Street, which has worked famously for Goldman Sachs and others. You know, we think it's time maybe that we turn our focus to Main Street. We reclaim the unspent funds, reclaim some of the funds that are being paid back, which will not be paid back in full. And we use it to put people back to work. Rebuilding America's infrastructure is a tried and true way to put people back to work. Unfortunately, the president has an advisor from Wall Street, Larry Summers, and a Treasury Secretary from Wall Street, Timmy Geithner, who don't like that idea. They want to keep the TARP money either to continue to bail out Wall Street if there are future problems, or maybe...
So Geithner does not want to give the money to small business, the TARP money?
No, they're saying they got to keep the money. There may be more needs on Wall Street, or maybe they should use it to pay down the deficit. That's absurd. We borrowed the money. How do you pay down the deficit?
Should he stay in his job, Congressman?
No.
You think Tim Geithner should be gone as Treasury Secretary?
I do, especially if you look back at the AIG scandal and Goldman and the others who got their bets paid off in full. Instead of saying, well, you bet, you lost. Yeah. They got paid back in full with taxpayer money through AIG. We channeled the money through them. Geithner would not answer my question when I said, were those naked credit default swaps by Goldman, or were they a counterparty? He said, I will not answer that question. I think they were naked credit default swaps. They were bets. They should not have gotten their money back.
So he's not coming clean with the Congress?
Absolutely not.
Okay, so have you asked the Obama administration to remove him, or will you?
The Populist Caucus is considering questions regarding both him and some other members of the economic team in the near future.
Okay, so there's been talk in the halls of Congress among some progressive Democrats that maybe it's time to ask the Obama administration to remove Tim Geithner. Am I hearing that correctly?
Yeah, he's being failed by his economic team. Their total orientation is Wall Street, not Main Street, not real jobs. I mean, okay, let's get past all the Goldman bailout and all that stuff. I've got firms in my district that are solvent, very little debt, and they can't get money out of bailed out firms
tight.
Like
it's incredible.
Like Wells Fargo.
It's absolutely ridiculous. Well, what was this announcement a few weeks ago that they were going to get money to the community banks? Where the hell is that?
Good question. Well, I can't tell you.
Okay, so the Obama, so they made an announcement that they were going to get this TARP money to community banks, but you don't know where that is right now.
Nope, we're still waiting. There's no new lending to my small businesses in my communities.
And how many congressmen in the House do you think would go along with Geithner's removal?
Well, when you mention either Geithner or Larry Summers, as they were mentioned in the Democratic caucus on jobs on Monday night, there are boos and cries of derision. I think there's a growing consensus in the caucus. We need a new economic team that cares more about jobs, Main Street, and the American people than it does about Wall Street and huge bonuses.
I tell you what, Congressman, this job summit thing that's coming up in the White House in December, it's like the Super Bowl of the economy, or at least a major playoff game. That's how I see it.
Well, we may have to sacrifice just 2 more jobs to get millions back for Americans.
Now, those are strong words, man. He's got to go. We should sacrifice the 2 jobs. Of course, he's talking about Geithner and Larry Summers. When their names are mentioned in the Democratic caucus, people boo? I mean, they're not even in the room. They're just booing because they're so mad. I mean, that's wow. And now as to Congressman DeFazio's substantive points, they're right on the head. First of all, you said that we were going to give to the big banks, Tim Geithner and Larry Summers, and that would come down to the smaller banks, the community banks, and that would eventually get to the small businesses. But it hasn't. It hasn't gone down to the small businesses. You haven't lent the money. Instead, you're taking it all and taking it home in bonuses. Exactly what we warned you about. I mean, on this show, we said they're not going to give it to other people. They're going to hoard it. And then they're going to take as much as they possibly can in bonuses and go home. And that's exactly what they're doing right now. So that's 100% on point. But look, I don't know if you caught it in there, but DeFazio had maybe the most important point there. He said when he had Geithner in front of him, he asked him, that $13 billion, and that's a lot of money, that went from the American taxpayer to AIG to Goldman Sachs. That was a bet that we paid off on AIG's behalf to Goldman Sachs. Was that a naked credit default swap, or were they a counterparty? Now, I know that's confusing. Let me just, again, clarify that for you because it's so important. If they're a counterparty, that means they were hedging their bet. And that happens in business all the time. Like if you're growing corn and you're not sure what the corn market's going to be by the time your crop comes in, you hedge your bet. And you might do what they call a derivative on that, right? So if you're a counterparty, that's normal business to some degree, okay, to a large degree. But if it's a naked credit default swap, it's just a bet. They have nothing to do with it, and they just made a casino bet. They bet on black or they bet on red. And paying that off with our money, I mean, we've had guests telling some of the top economists in the country on our show saying, well, that ought to be criminal, okay? I mean, that's crazy. It's like paying off, some crazy gambler's bets with taxpayer money. Charles Barkley loses $8 million, or Bill Bennett does, or something at a casino, and the American taxpayer picks up the bill. Why? Why would we do that? So, and what's amazing is that, and I've had some of the top reporters in the country on this show, and I've asked them, was it naked or were they a counterparty? And no one has the answer. And now I found out why they don't have the answer. Because Tim Geithner won't give you the answer. I mean, asked in House, meetings, and he's brought in front of the House. They ask him, which one is it? He says, I won't tell you. Oh, well, then you're gone. You're gone. And I'll get someone, a Treasury Secretary, who will tell me. What do you mean you're not going to tell the House whether you paid off a bet or whether they were a legitimate party to that transaction? That's crazy. That can't be tolerated. So that's why Tim Geithner should be fired. A government watchdog came out just this week with a report, a scathing report about Tim Geithner, saying that he funneled not just Goldman Sachs $13 billion, but overall to the top banks through AIG, taxpayer money, of $27 billion. And they're saying, well, those bets didn't have to be paid off. The government watchdog is saying that. The guy who was put in charge to see what's getting done right or wrong by Democrats and Republicans. And he's saying paying those bets off at 100% is mental. I mean, if you're going to pay them off at all, their best case scenario on the open market, if they were going to try to get their money back from someone that wasn't the government, at best would be 60%. And we would save tens of billions of dollars to the American taxpayer. And Geithner just wrote the bill, signed the check, and said, here you go, Goldman, here you go, J.P. Morgan, here you go, Citigroup, et cetera, and paid them all off. It is, look, if he's working for the banks, he's doing a great job for the top banks in the country. If he's working for us, he's doing a horrible job. Biden said the other day, oh, this is, we had to do these bailouts. Geithner says it every time he's in front of Congress. We had to do the bailouts, otherwise the economy would have crashed. But that's not the only question. The other part of the question is, how did you do the bailouts? You didn't have to give away all of our money to Goldman Sachs and the other guys when they were just making casino bets. No, there were parts that had to be done and parts that did not have to be done. Now, look, let me give you some final notes on financial reform as it makes it through its way through Congress. And this gives you a sense of the enormity of the reforms that are in play here. So we're begging the banks, even though we gave them the money, and now they're taking home and and I should tell you that too. Right now, 2009, record amount of bonuses going to the top 4 banks. Record. Better than at their prime in 06 and 07. Okay? So they're taking home all that money, and all we're asking them is, hey, can we at least see the derivatives bets you made? Can you do them in an open market so people know what they are? And they're saying, piss off. No, we're not going to tell you, okay? I'm going to make any damn bet I like, and then if it goes bust, you're going to have to pay for it. So now the House is reconsidering a loophole that they had in their derivatives reform bill. Do you know what the size of the loophole was? It was for foreign derivatives. $50 trillion. And guess who pushed for that loophole? Say it with me, Tim Geithner. He wanted to put in the so-called reform bill a $50 trillion loophole. Well, if you put the loophole in there, of course they're all going to do it through foreign derivatives and say, oh, no, yeah, I got that derivative from the Cayman Islands and I got it from Switzerland, etc. I'm now simplifying a complicated issue. But overall, that $50 trillion loophole was insanity. Now, finally, after a lot of pressure, the House Democrats are beginning to think, hey, maybe we should close that loophole. You think? And that isn't even to regulate these guys. It's just to find out the transactions that they're making. No. Dick Durbin was right. The banks run the place. They run Congress. And they certainly run Tim Geithner and Larry Summers. Pete DeFazio's right. And shockingly enough, Brady, is the Republican congressman from Texas, is somewhat right. Geithner's got to go. He's got to get fired. He's poisoning the administration. Young Turks. Back on the Young Turks. No, I'm not done with Wall Street yet. I'm back on a warpath. Let's go. All right, number one, do you know how much the top 4 banks, Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan Chase, Merrill Lynch, and Morgan Stanley, have earned in the first, quote unquote, in the first 9 months of 2009? $22.5 billion. And we pretend they earn that money when I just told you, the government watchdog said we paid off $27 billion in bets we shouldn't have to those guys. Is that our money? Yes, it's our money. Now, how are they so successful in grabbing it from us? Well, 25 of the top recipients of government bailout funds in this year alone have spent $71 million so far in the year in lobbying. $71 million in lobbying. Now, so let's get this straight as to how the money's flowing. It goes from us to the top banks, and then the top banks take it, and they funnel a tiny, tiny percentage of it to the politicians who are, enormously pleased with that money. They take it, and so then they water down the reforms, so then the banks get more money, funnel more to the politicians, and where is it coming from? A lot of it, not all of it, but a lot of it is coming from us. It's mental for us to allow any of these companies that receive taxpayer bailouts to lobby Congress. Are you kidding me? I mean, they're lobbying Congress and buying our politicians to work against our interests with our money. And then Geithner and Summers are going to come and tell me, no, we've been tough on the banks. Get them out of here. All right, now, by the way, to give you a sense of what crooks they are, I want to clarify, I went on a long rant on this, or a long explanation on this in one of our post games. They're not all crooks. They do some legitimate business. They're not all bad guys. I got a friend who works at Goldman Sachs that I went to high school with. I get their motivations, but you can't, and you can try to make all the money you want in a capitalist world as long as you're not taking taxpayer money to do it, okay? And as long as you're not committing crimes like J.P. Morgan did. They went and hoodwinked a local community. Well, they hoodwinked the community, not the politicians. They bought off the politicians. How do we know? They've admitted guilt in court. In Jefferson County, Alabama, they pay off the local politicians there to do a swap exchange that no one else understands, but here's the bottom line on it. Now, this is a very long story, and I'm going to simplify it for you. They were supposed to get, in that swap exchange, $700 million, J.P. Morgan, from Jefferson County, Alabama. But they're doing financial shenanigans and nobody finds out. and then they grease, in this case, quite illegally, with bribes, the local politicians to let them manage their money and so that they could funnel it to J.P. Morgan. And now that we found out about it, they're like, oh, yeah, our bad. Sure, we'll pay $25 million civil fine, a $50 million payment to the county because we were planning to rob them of $700 million, and we'll forfeit the $647 million in termination fees that we had claimed to through this fraudulent transaction. Now, this is just one county in Alabama in the country. How many counties are they robbing of $647 million? And they do it so often. I mean, $700 million is an enormous amount of money, right? But to them, I mean, they're running these things, these shell games all the time. So when they say, when the government says, hey, we caught you on this one, pay us $700 million, they're like, oh, yeah, no problem. Hey, send me some of that TARP money. $700 million? Ding! There it goes. They're not even sweating it. Like $700 million should come close to bankrupting a company, right? They're like, oh, it's nothing, man. That's the $700 million we're giving back to you. But you should see the billions we're stealing from other folks. Yeah, no, we're doing a great job of regulating the banks and keeping an eye on them, like Tim Geithner did when he was the president of the New York Fed. Great job. One last note on that. Finally, some members of the House, the Democrats, including Paul Konjarsky, who is leading the effort, is proposing a bill that would break up banks that are too big to fail. It's a very, very simple concept. Bernie Sanders has pushed it in the Senate. If you're too big to fail, you're too big to exist. So if you say, hey, you know what, if these banks go under, or this particular bank goes under, the American taxpayer has to bail them out because then the economy will collapse. Well, then they're too big to exist. We should find a sensible way of doing a number of things. I mean, breaking them up is the last step. But certainly regulating them, figuring out a way. For example, one of the things that you could do, I mean, God, these proposals are so logical that they're absolutely obvious. But they're not doing the obvious. Why? Because they're getting the $71 million in lobbying money, right? But now in this case, there are some good guys. And it's shocking with all the politicians that the banks have bought that there's still some good guys fighting the good fight. They're saying, look, for example, what you could do is, if you're going to do a transaction, you need to have only a certain amount of leverage. Because if you leverage yourself 10 to 1, we get it, that's how finance works. If you leverage yourself 400 to 1, as some of the derivatives are, well, then if you don't, obviously that it's going to cause tremendous risk, and you subject yourself to being, bankrupt the minute there's a fluctuation in the market. And then if you're bankrupt, then we're all on the hook for it. So no, we're not going to let you do that. I mean, there's great pieces of legislation being proposed here. Now, it has an absolute uphill battle. Now, if the Geithner and Summers and Obama, we can't leave Obama out of this. He's the boss. He's the one making all the wrong decisions in allowing his Treasury Department to go in this way. And the White House keeps fighting all the effective reforms coming out of the House and the Senate that are being proposed, right? What's the White House position on this? Of course not. Hell no. No, my God, that would bother Geithner's friends at the banks. They call him all the time. They tell him what to do. He's their bitch. He can't have Konjarsky actually putting together legislation that makes sense. God, I get worked up on this, man, because they're taking our money. It's crazy. So will this... Now, what the White House should do is they say, oh, yeah, too big to fail, too big to exist. Absolutely. It makes perfect sense. We don't want to put the American taxpayer on the hook for it. Instead, they're saying, yeah, put the taxpayer on the hook for it. I'll tell you what, if these sons of bitches at the banks collapse the economy again, and they will, it's only a matter of time unless we do the reform, real reform, strong reform. If they do it again, and then the economy collapses, and the Republicans blame Obama, they're going to be right. Now, I know, the Republicans would have done worse. They don't want to do any of these regulations. They're going to vote against 90% of these regulations. On the rare cases that they're not, Richard Shelby supported a reform that made sense last week, and we went ballistic in celebrating that. He's a Republican from Alabama, okay? In 90% of the cases, they're wrong, but it doesn't matter if they're wrong or right now. They're not in charge. If the Democrats get it wrong, it doesn't matter what the Republican proposal would have been or what they would have done. They're going to claim, oh, yeah, we would have done it right. And the whole country is going to believe them. And if you do that wrong, Obama, and you collapse this economy, well, it ain't no one's fault but your own. They're couple of guys right now inside the administration that are poisoning it. Geithner, Summers, and on other issues, Rahm Emanuel. And the longer that Obama sticks with them, the longer it's his fault. And he's responsible for their actions, and he ought to know better. All right, now, look, I'm going to go on to health care reform here, and John Conyers gives you a sense of how fed up the House Democrats are with how reluctant the White House is to push for real change. When asked about Obama's leadership in fighting for health care reform, here's what John Conyers had to say. Has he been strong enough? Quote, "Of course not. Of course not. You know, holding hands out and beer on Friday nights in the White House and bowing down to every nutty right-wing proposal about health care and saying on occasion that public options aren't all that important is doing a disservice to the Barack Obama that I first met, who was an ardent single-payer enthusiast himself." I mean, think about it, how far we are from single-payer. You know, Sherrod Brown on Rachel Maddow's program the other day, he broke it down to like the 7 or 8 compromises we went down, okay? And that without a single compromise coming from the right wing part of this equation, right? And in the beginning, Obama was for single payer. He gets into the White House, whew, single payer is out the door, compromise 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and here comes Conyers again on him. Quote, "That is essentially what Rahm Emanuel has said. Just give us anything and we'll declare victory." And what he's referring to is Rahm Emanuel saying over and over again, and John Conyers has not missed this, yeah, public option yes, public option no, who cares? You know, this compromise, that compromise, just give us something and we'll call it a political victory. And who cares what it actually does? This is what I'm talking about when I say poisoning the administration. Conyers continues, "Not only is it not a victory, but when it doesn't work, guess who will come at him? The same guys that were saying, let's go along with anything. That is all my buddy Rahm Emanuel is trying to get anything. But look, the bill doesn't go into effect for 3 years. Many people that we are trying to help will be dead by then." I mean, he's referring at the end there to the fact that the bill doesn't even get started in 2013, and that's when the mandates start. The help with pre-existing conditions, etc., in the latest Senate version, well, that doesn't get started until 2014. So the mandates and the paying starts before we even get the help. 2014? That's 5 years from now. And right now, Rahm Emanuel pushing for the trigger. And the trigger would get triggered 5 years after those 5 years. And you wonder why we're worried and aggrieved and annoyed by Rahm Emanuel and the White House, who are not fighting hard enough. This is not the change we asked for, not the change we voted for. Young Turks. Back on the Young Turks. Now we're going to talk to David Sirota. He's author of Hostile Takeover, of course, and he's written in his syndicated column, "We're the Real Deficit Hawks." David, welcome back to the Young Turks.
Hey, thanks for having me.
First, today the Senate announced their version of the health care reform bill, Harry Reid did, and every single article says that it will cost us $848 billion. And they say the House's version will cost us $1 trillion. Can you tell us why that is, to say the least, misleading?
Well, because it's like saying that if I buy some stock for $1,000 and I make $1,100 on my investment, that the investment cost me $1,000. Well, it's technically true the investment cost me $1,000, but I made $100. This Congressional Budget Office report for both the House and Senate bill says that these bills cost about somewhere between $800 and $900 billion. That's the outlay, that's the investment. But that through its tax changes and through its budget cuts to private insurance subsidies through Medicare, it will recover far more than it spends. The House bill will recover about $11 billion a year in total. So at the end of 10 years, the House and Senate bills will recover somewhere between $100 and $200 billion. So at the end of 10 years, the deficit based on just the impact of the health care bill will be about $100 to $200 billion less. So That's the real story. That's the real cost of these bills. The cost of these bills is that taxpayers ultimately will make back more than they invest.
So let's get this straight. When in the House version, at the end of 10 years, we're saving $111 billion. And in the Senate version, at the end of 10 years, we're saving $130 billion. Now, how about other programs where, for example, as you point out in your column, defense? Do we save any money back, or are we just doing outlays there?
No, it's just outlays. Now, you could argue that when you spend money on defense, it's akin to some form of stimulus spending, right? It's like, you spend money and that theoretically creates jobs and that theoretically creates tax revenues. But just on a straight-up budgetary basis, the way, comparing apples to apples, the way the Congressional Budget Office scores the health care bill, because you could make the same argument with health care, that a health care expenditure is going to create jobs. So if you want to compare apples to apples, what goes out in a bill versus what comes in a bill, the healthcare bills propose spending $800 to $900 billion, and their tax and budget cutting changes would recover about $900 billion to $1 trillion, with a net gain of $100 billion to $200 billion at the end of the day. Defense bills, the one-year defense bill would spend $636 billion in 1 year, so over 10 years, that's almost $7 trillion over 10 years, and there are no tax or budget-cutting provisions in those bills. So apples to apples, you're talking about either saving $200 billion on health care and or spending, reduce or increasing the deficit by $7 trillion with the defense bill.
So the reason you point that out is because whether it's conservative Republicans or conservative Democrats, whenever they say they're concerned about the deficit, they mention health care, which actually reduces the deficit, which makes no damn sense at all, but they never mention defense spending. So Lieberman, for example, loves spending more money in Iraq and Afghanistan, and that money never gets back to us, and he never mentions the deficit there. Is that roughly right?
That's exactly what's going on. And I've got some modicum of respect for people who are at least ideologically consistent. I mean, I don't agree necessarily with people like Ron Paul on everything, but at least he's a guy who says, look, I don't support health care spending, and I'm willing to vote against really wasteful defense programs and even sometimes the defense bill. The problem, as you said, is that there's a hypocrisy here. Is that and I've called it before, it's selective deficit disorder. Deficits only matter when the government is spending on middle-class priorities. But when the government is spending on defense contractors or tax loopholes or corporate tax subsidies, suddenly the same people who say they care about or are worried about deficits aren't worried at all.
So David's written the books, The Uprising and Hostile Takeover. It's something interesting is happening here, David. That populist uprising that you predicted, I see it. And it's interesting because I see it on the left-wing side. I also see it on the right-wing side. They just are misdirected. They're angry, but they don't know what to be angry about, so they get tricked by the Becks and the Hannitys of the world. But how long can they keep this up where, the guys who are pretending to be conservative are actually corporatists? And they're doing the bidding of the lobbyists who pay them their money while pretending to take advantage of the right-wing populism. How long can they keep it up before the gig is up?
Well, I think they can keep it up for as long as the Democrats allow them to keep it up. I mean, the more the contrast is drawn, I think, the better. That's why I think ultimately the health care debate will be good for Democrats, because I think that the Republicans will dig in and they will oppose health care. And I think what we're seeing, it's not perfect, but it's certainly better than the status quo. And the Democrats will be able to draw, if they continue to fight in the right way, they'll be able to draw this precise contrast. Now, I think,
but they don't. That's the problem. They don't.
Yeah, that is certainly the problem. I mean, I think. Look, we saw an announcement today. Harry Reid said he's not going to consider passing the health care bill with just 51 votes through the reconciliation process. So you're right. Look, the Democrats, and let's be fair, there are some Democrats who are part of this problem. The blue dogs in the House, for instance, who voted against health care, these are guys who are knee-jerk yes votes for the most bloated defense spending bills in our country's history. Remember, and this is a shocking statistic, it was National Journal 2 months ago that reported that the Democrats in Congress and President Obama are on track in the first term here of the Obama administration to spend more in a single presidential term than any single presidential term has spent on defense since World War II.
And they cut some programs, the helicopter for the president, et cetera, but not nearly enough. And they actually have some help from John McCain, and they should use it to go further. But, of course, that has a political price, and they don't want to pay that political price. Now, finally, David, I think the real problem here is the media. Because the media keeps saying, oh, the bill costs $848 billion. It costs $1 trillion. It costs. Oh, when Lieberman says, oh, it's he's concerned about the deficit, they treat it as if it's a legitimate point. So we come back to that. I'm tired of asking it, but we got to ask it. We got to keep insisting on it. What is it? I mean, does the media know this and they don't want to tell the American people, or they're just so damn thick-headed that they can't understand these simple concepts?
No, I think the media understands these concepts. These reporters who cover budget matters understand this. I think that what it is that the media understands what is going to be a headline that is waved around and what isn't. They understand the existing political dynamic, which is that unfortunately it's not controversial to pass a $636 billion deficit-expanding, waste-ridden Pentagon budget bill, but it is controversial to try to pass an $80 billion a year, because that's what it is, $800 billion over 10 years, $80 billion a year health care bill. So you get, these little teeny stories, if at all, about these defense bills, and you get the health care bills whose headlines stress the point that is going to be most inflammatory. Remember, it's not technically wrong to say that the health care bill will require an outlay of $800 billion. It is, but it is dishonest and misleading to say that without saying that over 10 years that it will actually save money. And that's what the media does, because it wants to sensationalize things.
David Sirota, the author of The Uprising and Hostile Takeover. Thank you for joining us, man. We appreciate it.
Hey, thanks, Jay.
And the syndicated column by David is excellent. You should check it out. And he's been calling it right for a long time. Now, finally, I promised you Michael Savage earlier in the show. We got to give you Michael Savage. He's got a different take on the Khalid Sheikh Mohammed trial and who should be tried instead. Well, it certainly is unique. Clip number 5.
There are other terrorists from Guantanamo who are going to be tried by military tribunal, Nashiri and Mohammed. Now, why would they take 2 of them and bring them to New York while allowing to leave the other 3 for a military tribunal? The answer is strict politics, because Holder has committed an criminal act, in my opinion, and frankly, the government should try Holder for this act. There's no reason that Congress can't hold a hearing on Holder's motivations and Obama's motivations. These are just humans. They're just humans, they're not gods. Holder said we're at war. He said we are at war. So why is he now violating a Supreme Court precedent that you try war criminals in a military tribunal? One reason only: to attack the political opposition. No other reason. Period. End of story. That's it. What else do you want to talk about? Houston, Texas. Mario, you're on the Savage Nation.
Yeah, Michael, I want to comment on that trial.
Yeah.
I really think that the reason why he's doing this way he could show that he's above the law, because those people are not going to get a fair trial, and they're going to end up sending them back where they came from. They're not going to be able.
If we let the Prozacian lunatics from NYU, Columbia, and Harvard Law, the cockamamie, cockeyed people in the law profession who are going to defend these bastards, have their way, not only will they be found innocent, they will wind up suing the American people and winning a fortune after perpetrating the greatest war crime on our soil. That's what's liable to happen. I think that the lawyers who defend them should be thrown into a prison with them and be transported to Yemen. I think the lawyers who would defend them should be sent to Yemen. That's my opinion.
How very American of you. Yes, lawyers that defend criminals should be locked up in jail. Does this guy understand anything about the United States of America? Anything at all? It's unreal. By the way, I'm a little biased here because I'm one of those cockamamie, Prozac obsessed, or whatever he called us, lunatics that went to Columbia Law. I should also be locked up, I'm sure, according to him. And look at how quick they want to do hearings on the Obama administration when they said it was unacceptable to ever do them on Bush. Listen to these lunatics rant. Young Turks.
Yeah, this one right here goes out to all the babies, mamas.